All right, welcome in. Brian Edwards, MajorWager.com, talking college football games of the year. The Golden Nugget, Tony Miller, Aaron Kessler, and the gang out in Las Vegas, releasing more than 100 games of the year this past Thursday, and we are here to discuss. Now, it used to be that if a team was favored by double digits in every game of the year, that'd be pretty big news. I believe that FSU team, when Jameis was coming back after they had gotten extremely fortunate to beat Auburn in the Natty game the year before, I think they were double-digit favorites in every game coming back. I want to say Leinart and Bush and a couple of those teams might have been. And then here in the last couple of years, Alabama, or maybe even 3 or 4 years for Alabama, in the last couple of years for Clemson, they've been double-digit favorites in every game. So for Alabama and Clemson, it's not big news to be double-digit favorite in every game these days. But for them to be favored by as much as they are this year, it is big news. In fact, Clemson, a favorite of 17.5 points or more in 7 line games of the year from the Nugget. Alabama, favored by 13 or more in 7 line games for them as well. So let's talk Clemson to start. Obviously, the reigning champs bring back Trevor Lawrence. They bring back T. Higgins, Justin Ross, Amari Rodgers in the receiving group, Travis Etienne, one of the better running backs in the country. Bring back nearly the entire O-line. Now, obviously, they lost a lot of those big-time D linemen. All three went in the first round, and a fourth or even a fifth, I think, went, if I'm not mistaken. Anyhow, okay, so they barely escaped College Station with a 28-26 win at A&M last year, which they were a double-digit favorite. I forget what it was games of the year wise, but that week it was around 12 and a half. So they get Texas A&M at home this time in week 2, and they're favored by 7.5. Now, if we fast forward a few weeks, Clemson is an 18-point favorite against Syracuse. I'm going to go ahead and list the rest of the games, then I'm going to come back to the Syracuse game because that's the one that I think is a little too many. Okay, so Clemson at North Carolina, minus 27 versus the semis at Death Valley, minus 25, minus 32 at Louisville, where Scott Satterfield from App State has taken over, minus 24 at NC State, and minus 23.5 at South Carolina. That one might be a tad rich as well, but I'm not sprinting to the window to get on the Gamecocks there. But so let's talk the Syracuse-Clemson game because, look, I went back the last 18 ACC games for Clemson, 17-1 straight up, okay, and 15 of those 18 games they've won by double digits, and many they've won by 25, 30 or more, especially last year. So the 3 exceptions in those last 18 ACC games, they only won by 7 at NC State in 2017, lost outright in that Friday night game when Kelly Bryant was injured late in the second quarter at Syracuse at the Carrier Dome. And then last year at Death Valley, Dino and Dungy go in there. They get a field goal in the opening drive, and they basically led pretty much the entire game. Clemson did take a brief lead there, maybe in the first quarter and maybe a part of the second, but for the most of the way, Syracuse led. And in fact, when Dungy scored on a 4th and goal from about the 1.5-2-yard line, with around 11, 12 minutes left, the Cuse had a 23-13 lead. But Clemson, with Lawrence out, he had gotten they ended up claiming it wasn't a concussion. I think it was a concussion. He got rocked in the second quarter. That was his first career start as well. But anyway, Clemson rallied and won 27-23. But clearly Syracuse has been the one ACC team that has given Clemson fits here the last couple of years. I know they lose Eric Dungy, but they've got a lot of good talent coming back. Tommy DeVito, I believe a third-year sophomore quarterback, He rallied them to force overtime and eventually beat North Carolina last year. Dungy also got hurt in the first half against FSU last year, and he played the rest of the way, and they won 30-3 blowout on the Noles. So plus 18, I think, is the only number that might not be justified. I mean, 14, okay, maybe even 15. Maybe even 15 and a half, 16. 18, a little too many. If there's one spot there where I would fade Clemson, that would be it. All right, let's move to Alabama. Favored by 13 in each game. They are minus 18 at South Carolina in September. Of course, their first trip to Williams-Brice since Spurrier put it on Saban again. Only coach who's just owned Saban, owned him in head-to-head matchups. And he coached up Steven Garcia to play the game of his life. Last trip there, doesn't have much meaning. Just getting a shout out in from my old ball coach. 35-21 in that one. That was in 2010. And Alabama's minus 18 at South Carolina. Did a little digging on Muschamp. Home underdog 8 times at South Carolina, 4-4 against the spread, 3 outright wins. But as a double-digit home underdog, 2-0 against the spread, 1 outright win. And obviously, I mentioned South Carolina plus 23.5 at home to Clemson. So they'll have 2 double-digit home dog spots this year. And Muschamp has thrived in those, albeit only 2. So the rest of the numbers on Alabama, minus 34 versus Ole Miss, minus 14 at A&M. So A&M, like South Carolina, has to play Clemson and Alabama this year. Much fun, huh? Minus 31 versus Tennessee. And a note on the Vols, they only had 1 game make the more than 100 games of the year from the Nugget. Sorry, Vols. And plus 31 at Alabama is the only one. Alabama minus 16 versus LSU. Minus 20 at Mississippi State, where they barely escaped Stark Vegas and Scott Field 2 years ago. Trailed a good chunk of that game as well. And minus 13 in the Iron Bowl at Auburn. Okay, moving on to some other ones. Week 2, Michigan minus 17.5 at home against Army. Remember, Army went to Norman, took the Sooners to overtime in late September last year. Excuse me, they'll get a shot at the Big House to do the same thing this year. Another big week 2 game, LSU on the road at Texas, minus 2. Tom Herman, we know he's thrived in underdog situations. 3 home dog spots since arriving in Austin, 2-0-1 against the spread. As an underdog 11 times while at Texas, 8-2-1 against the spread with 5 outright wins. Obviously, one of those being against Georgia and the Pups in the Sugar Bowl this past year. All right, skipping ahead to week 4, big game for Georgia as they host Notre Dame. Notre Dame comes tween the hedges. Again, that's week 4. Georgia opening as a 9.5-point home favorite. Obviously, Notre Dame looking to avenge a 20-19 loss in South Bend to UGA a couple of years ago. I often like, I don't ever say I always do anything in gambling, but I often like to look for teams with a quarterback making his first career true road start. And this will apply for Auburn. Now, I say true road because they are at A&M, whereas they do play at Jerry World against Oregon early on, or actually in week 1. But that's not a true road assignment. So when Auburn goes to Texas A&M, whether it is Bo Nix, Patrick's son, Patrick of 90s quarterback fame at Auburn, he's a true freshman coming in. Whether it's him or another guy, it doesn't matter. They don't have anybody on their team who has started a collegiate game. And so it'll be a first career road start, and A&M's only minus 3.5 to Auburn. I undoubtedly lean A&M that way. And if I'm not in Vegas to be at the Golden Nugget, but if I were to have access to making that wager right now, I would certainly make it on A&M minus 3.5. Okay, the Pac-12 North race, since the Pac-12 championship game came into existence, 6 out of 7 times the Pac-12 North has been won by Washington or Stanford. They're playing a little earlier in the season this year, a Week 5 showdown in Palo Alto. And for that game, we have – oh, duh. No wonder I wasn't seeing a number. It opened as a pick'em. Okay, and Stanford lost a lot. Only 3 starters back on offense. Walker Little, the projected top 10 pick in the NFL draft, offensive tackle, and KJ Costello. Stanford loses a lot of talent. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, my guy Caden Smith, several very key players on both the O-line and D-line. Other October 5th games of note, Florida and Auburn finally meeting up for the first time in many moons. Florida -7 at the Swamp against the Aubies. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. There is another line game for Tennessee. +18 at home against Georgia. I was on press row Friday in Chattanooga, and my man Jay Greason said Tennessee only had 1 line game. So that's where I was getting that quote. Come on, Jay. Or come on, me, not checking those facts. Texas -7 at West Virginia, and Michigan -12 versus Iowa in the Big House. So Week 6, Kirby Smart facing his old UGA teammate, Will Muschamp, who also gave him his first career college football coaching job down at Valdosta State. Georgia, a 20-point home favorite against the Gamecocks. LSU, that same week, a 4.5-point chalk against the – I'm sorry, a 4-point chalk against the Gators. Red River Rivalry on October 12th, OU -6.5 against Texas. Remember, Jalen Hurts taking over, trying to make it 3 Heismans in a row for Lincoln Riley quarterbacks. Let's skip ahead to October 19th. Michigan travels to Happy Valley to challenge Penn State. Michigan, a 4.5-point favorite. Looking to October 26th, this was one of the bigger line moves at the Nugget on Thursday, as LSU opened -9.5 versus Auburn. Not only did it move 3 points, it jumped the key number of 7 down to -6.5. Now remember, LSU has won back-to-back nail biters in this series. They rallied from that big halftime deficit to win in Baton Rouge 2 years ago, and then the walk-off field goal on the Plains last year, and the year before. So we're going back to 16 when the Mad Hat, now the coach at KU, made like his 80th career kindergarten clock management decision and paid for it with his job the next day, and understandably so. Week 8 numbers: Syracuse open -1.5 against at FSU. Remember that shellacking they put on the semis last year up at the Carrier Dome, 30-3 if memory serves. So revenge-minded Noles. That was another big line move. Rather than the semis being 1.5-point home dogs, they are now -3. Other Week 8 numbers: Ohio State -13 versus Wisconsin, Michigan -6 versus Notre Dame, Oregon -6 versus Mike Leach's Wazoo bunch, and Iowa -3 at Northwestern. The next week, FSU -1.5 at home to Manny Diaz and the Canes, and Georgia -3.5 to once again, Mighty's Gators, that is. November 9th, Big Ten West Showdown, Wisconsin, Camp Randall, 2.5-point home chalk to Kirk Ferentz, Nate Stanley and the Hawkeyes. Nate Stanley coming back 26-10 TDI&T ratio. Wisconsin obviously features running back Jonathan Taylor, one of the best in the country, 2,194 yards and 16 rushing touchdowns last year. November 16th, we've got Michigan -13 versus Michigan State. LSU -14.5 at Ole Miss. Washington State -6.5 versus Stanford. Georgia minus 7.5 at Auburn. Does that seem a little rich? Yeah, maybe. I don't, when I don't have a good idea about quarterback play for a team, I don't have any strong opinions about a team in the summer. I like to see that quarterback play. And again, I haven't seen Bo Nix or whoever's going to get the nod at quarterback for Auburn. Gus Malzahn, obviously one of the biggest hot seat coaches this year. Now, I will point out, 8 times a home underdog during Malzahn's tenure. Auburn 6-2 against the spread in those games. Rivalry week starts Thanksgiving Day with the Egg Bowl. Mississippi State minus 13.5 at home to the Rebels of Ole Miss. On that Friday, Washington is minus 9 to Washington State in the Apple Cup, and Nebraska at home to Iowa is a pick'em, despite the fact that Michigan has lost 14 of its last 15 to Ohio State, which hung a 62 spot on the Wolverines last year, what was at the time the number 1 ranked defense in America. Nevertheless, Jim Harbaugh's bunch minus 3.5 versus Ohio State at the Big House this year. Other rivalry games, Florida minus 14 versus FSU. Notre Dame minus 5.5 at Stanford. Oklahoma minus 10 at Oklahoma State. LSU minus 7.5 versus A&M and Red Stick. Big revenge game for the Bayou Bengals after that gut-wrenching 7 overtime 74-72 loss at Kyle Field in the 12th man last year. Two other games to note with big line moves. Washington opened minus 8 versus Utah at home for Washington. That was bet down to Washington minus 5. A lot of action on the Utes there. And Wisconsin opened minus 1 at Nebraska. Nebraska is now a 3-point home favorite in that showdown. I am Brian Edwards of MajorWager.com, and there are your games of the year analysis, updates, what have you, and you can check out an article that I wrote on these games at Major Wager. All right, over and out.